Today, people know me as Ethan Brooks, a successful entrepreneur in the world of technology. Someone who built a company from the ground up and turned it into something people now admire. I speak at conferences, travel for work, and live a life that many people would probably describe as inspiring. From the outside, it may seem like I always knew where I was going, as if success had somehow been waiting for me all along. But the truth is much more complicated than that, because the life I have today did not begin with confidence, talent, or opportunity. It began with pain, confusion, and a quiet moment in a classroom when one person chose to see something in me that I could not yet see in myself. When I was 14 years old, life felt unbearably heavy for someone my age. 2 years earlier, my father had walked out of our lives without warning, leaving my mother alone to raise me and my younger brother. He didn't leave behind answers, comfort, or even the kind of goodbye that could have given us closure. He was simply gone, and after that, everything inside our home changed. My mother tried her best to hold our small family together. But no matter how hard she worked, life always felt one step away from falling apart. She spent long hours working at a small cafe, often leaving before sunrise and coming home late at night exhausted, carrying the smell of coffee and fried food on her clothes and the weight of endless responsibilities on her shoulders. Because she was always working, I spent most of my time alone, especially in the evenings when the apartment felt its quietest. I often sat at the kitchen table with my school books open in front of me while my younger brother slept in the next room. But even when I tried to study, my mind rarely stayed on the page. I was always tired, always distracted, and always carrying worries that felt too big for someone my age to explain. Little by little, those worries began to show up at school. My grades dropped, my interest disappeared, and eventually I stopped trying altogether. Not because I was lazy, but because I had already started believing that school and success belonged to other people, not to someone like me. By the time I entered 9th grade, I had already convinced myself that my future had been decided for me. I believed that no matter how hard I tried, life would always be a struggle, and that some people were simply born to survive instead of succeed. That was the mindset I carried with me into the school year when Mrs. Thompson walked into my life. She was our new literature teacher, and from the very first day, there was something different about her. She wasn't loud or overly strict, and she didn't try to force attention the way some teachers did. Instead, she had a calm presence that made people notice her naturally. I still remember the first time she entered the classroom, carrying a stack of books in her arms and greeting us with a warm but steady voice. While most students barely paid attention, I sat where I always sat, in the back of the room near the window, because that seat allowed me to stay unnoticed and drift somewhere else whenever I wanted. During those first few lessons, I barely participated. My notebook remained empty, my eyes stayed distant, and I made no effort to pretend I cared. One afternoon, just as I was about to leave after class, Mrs. Thompson called my name and gently pointed out that I hadn't written a single thing during the entire lesson. I expected criticism, maybe even the kind of lecture I had heard too many times before, but instead she simply smiled and said that sometimes writing helps people understand their own thoughts more clearly. It was such a simple sentence, yet something about the way she said it made it stay with me longer than I expected. A few days later, she gave the class a short story to read and asked everyone to write a personal reflection about the main character. Like always, I sat there doing nothing, staring at the page without any intention of writing a single word, until she quietly walked over to my desk and asked me what I thought the character was feeling. At first, I tried to avoid the question, but after a few seconds of silence, I admitted that I thought the character felt invisible, as if he were surrounded by people who never truly saw him. Instead of moving on, Mrs. Thompson looked at me as though I had said something important, and then told me that it was a powerful observation and that I should write it down. That moment may have seemed small to anyone else, but to me, it meant something I didn't yet have the words to explain. Because it was the first time in a very long time that an adult had treated my thoughts as if they had real value. From that point on, something inside me began to shift. Slowly and quietly, because Mrs. Thompson kept doing something no teacher had ever really done before. She kept asking me what I thought. And every time I answered, she listened as if my words genuinely mattered. Over the following weeks, she encouraged me to speak more in class, asked for my opinions on stories and poems, and little by little, I found myself paying attention in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time in a long while, school no longer felt like a place where I was simply waiting to fail. Then one afternoon after class, she stopped me again and handed me a novel she had found in a used bookstore, saying she had a feeling I might connect with it. The story was about a teenage boy struggling with family problems, loneliness, and self-doubt, and that night, after my brother had fallen asleep and my mother was still at work, I opened the book at the kitchen table and began reading under the dim yellow light above the sink. What I thought would be a few pages turned into hours, because for the first time in months, I felt completely absorbed by something that made me feel understood. The loneliness of the main character, the fear he carried, and the quiet hope hidden underneath it all felt painfully familiar to me. When I finally closed the book, I realized that something inside me had quietly come back to life, and that something was hope. After that, Mrs. Thompson began giving me small writing assignments that gradually became more personal and meaningful. Sometimes she asked me to write about fear, sometimes about memory, and other times about what kind of future I imagined for myself, even if I couldn't fully picture one yet. At first, I struggled to express myself. But the more I wrote, the more I realized that putting my thoughts into words made them feel less overwhelming. Then one day, she handed back an essay I had written. And at the top of the page, in red ink, were two words I had never seen on my work before. I stared at those words much longer than I would ever admit out loud, because no teacher had ever looked at something I created and made me feel proud of it. When I asked her if she really meant it, she looked at me almost as if the question itself surprised her and said that of course she meant it. Because writing honestly was a strength, not a weakness. Something changed inside me that day. For the first time, success no longer felt like a world built for other people. It felt distant, unfamiliar, and maybe even frightening, but it also felt possible. Still, even as things slowly improved at school, life at home remained difficult. One evening, I overheard my mother speaking quietly on the phone with my aunt, telling her that she didn't know how she was going to afford some of my school expenses the following month because rent had already taken most of her paycheck. Hearing that left me feeling helpless, and the next day I went to school carrying a kind of fear I couldn't hide. Mrs. Thompson noticed immediately, and when she gently asked me what was wrong, I finally told her the truth. I explained that money was tight and that I might have to stop participating in some school activities, not because I wanted to, but because my family simply couldn't afford them. She listened carefully without interrupting, and when I finished, she calmly told me not to let one difficult season decide the rest of my future. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant, but not long after that, the school announced a student writing competition, and the winner would receive books, recognition, and a small financial award. I had no intention of entering, because I still believed there were students far more talented and deserving than me. But Mrs. Thompson placed the entry form on my desk and told me, with complete confidence, that I should try. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table once again and wrote something more honest than anything I had ever written before. I wrote about my family, about silent struggles, about growing up too quickly, and about the quiet hope that life could still become something better than what I had known. When I handed the essay to her the next day, she read it carefully and then looked at me with eyes that seemed almost emotional. In a voice I still remember clearly, she said, "Ethan, this is extraordinary." Weeks later, during a school assembly in the gym, the winners were announced in front of everyone, and when the principal called my name for first place, I genuinely thought I had imagined it. As I walked toward the stage with applause filling the room, I looked into the crowd and found Mrs. Thompson standing near the back with a proud smile on her face, and in that moment, I understood something I had never truly felt before. Before I ever believed in myself, someone else had already chosen to believe in me first. That moment became the beginning of a completely different future. I worked harder, my grades improved, and over time I became one of the strongest students in my class. I eventually earned a scholarship to university, where I studied software engineering, and although the journey was difficult and full of moments where I wanted to give up, I kept hearing Mrs. Thompson's voice in my mind, reminding me that growth mattered more than perfection. Years later, after graduating with honors, I built a small startup with 2 close friends, and after many setbacks and failures, that company eventually became the successful business people know me for today. Even with everything life gave me later, I never forgot the woman who first helped me see my own potential. We stayed in touch over the years, and then one day, long after I had become an adult, I received an invitation to attend her retirement ceremony at my old school. I went without hesitation, never imagining that I was about to learn something that would move me more deeply than almost anything else in my life. During the ceremony, after the speeches and applause, Mrs. Thompson stood at the microphone and shared a story about a student she had once taught. A student who had been struggling quietly while life at home made everything harder than it should have been. As she continued speaking, I slowly realized that she was talking about me. Then, in front of the entire room, she revealed that years earlier, she had secretly used her own money to help cover some of my school supplies, activity costs, and even certain writing competition expenses because she never wanted financial hardship to become the reason I gave up on myself. For a moment, I couldn't move. All the small things I had never questioned suddenly made sense, and as the truth settled into my chest, my eyes filled with tears. When she finally looked at me and said that watching me build a life I once thought was impossible had been one of the greatest joys of her career, I stood up and walked toward the stage, barely able to breathe. I hugged her tightly and asked, with tears in my voice, why she had never told me the truth. She simply smiled in the same gentle way she always had and answered, "Because you didn't need pity, you needed a chance." Even now, after everything I have achieved, I still believe that was the moment I truly understood what success means, because success is not only about talent, money, or opportunity. Sometimes, It begins the moment one person chooses to see something valuable in you before you are able to see it in yourself. Sometimes, the people who change our lives the most are not the loudest or the most visible ones, but the quiet souls who believe in us so deeply that their kindness continues shaping our future long after the moment itself has passed. And if people ask me today how I became successful, I could mention discipline, hard work, education, and perseverance. And all of that would be true. But none of it would be the whole truth, because before I became the man people admire today, I was simply a lost boy sitting in the back of a classroom, and one teacher chose not to let me stay there. Hey there! Before you go, I really want you to make sure you hit that subscribe button. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know whenever I upload new content that will help you improve and